The Jets head to Jacksonville in Week 15 to take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's a matchup between two of the worst teams in the NFL, and this game revives an age-old debate among fans. Let's break it all down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, December 13th. Hope you stay lucky on this Friday the 13th. I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the Jets are in Jacksonville this weekend. They take on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Kickoff time scheduled for 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday. The game will be seen on Fox, so it's not a CBS game. This game will be shown on Fox. Today, we're going to preview the game, and this is the type of game that revives the age-old debate as a fan. Do you want to see your team win a late-season game, or do you want to see your team lose for draft position? This game will have major implications on the NFL draft order in the spring of 2025, because right now both the Jets and the Jaguars are 3-10. The Jets currently would hold the 7th pick in the NFL draft if the season ended today. The Jaguars would currently hold the 5th pick. And the reason for that is the first tiebreaker is strength of schedule. So the Jets have had a tougher schedule so far than Jacksonville. But the Jets, if they lose out, they have a good shot to get a really high pick, because currently in the NFL, there are two teams, the Raiders and the Giants, which are 2-11. And there are 6 other teams that are 3-10, the Jets among them: New England, Carolina, Jacksonville, Tennessee, the Jets, and Cleveland. So you have 8 teams within a game of the top overall pick in the 2025 NFL draft. That is no small deal. And that means that this game has major implications. And that means that when you're out of the playoffs, when you're having a miserable season, there's always going to be a divide in the fan base. And that's fine. And that's natural. And it's good. It's not, I don't think anybody's wrong in how they approach this game, because I understand it. You know, you only get 17 games a year. You want to go out and have an enjoyable Sunday. Jets have only won on one Sunday this year. They have 3 wins. 2 of the wins were on Thursday night. So you've only had like one enjoyable Sunday afternoon so far this year. That was all the way back in week 2 in September against the Tennessee Titans. So if you're a fan, you just want to see your team win. I understand that. If you're a fan, you want to see you think it's in the team's best long-term interest to lose out and get as high of a pick as possible. I understand that too. A couple of years ago, I did an article on GangGreenNation.com, and I explored several late season scenarios where the Jets were desperately out of the playoff race and they actually won a couple late season games and hurt their draft position. And you know what I found? I found about half the times it was a good thing and half the times it was a bad thing. Like about half the times it cost them a really good player and they ended up with a guy who wasn't so good. But half the time, the guy that got picked ahead of them was overhyped, and it actually ended up benefiting the Jets to win those games and drop to a lower pick, because even though they had the lower pick, they got a better player. So, I don't know that there's that as big of a difference as people make it out to be. I think that it depends on the situation. It depends on the year. It depends on the draft class. I mean, right now, the player I'd love to see the Jets get is Travis Hunter, because he's such a unique player. If you're not familiar with him, he's the overwhelming favorite to win the Heisman Trophy tomorrow. In New York. He plays for Colorado. He plays both ways. He plays both wide receiver and cornerback. Now, can he play both full-time in the NFL? That's an open question. That's something we'll probably discuss on the show many times between now and the NFL draft. So, part of me says I want to see the Jets lose to get Travis Hunter. Another part of me, though, says that, sometimes these guys who are the top picks don't pan out. Sometimes they're disappointing. I remember back in 2005, all the talk was, oh, the Jets need to lose. The Jets need to get Reggie Bush. Reggie Bush was viewed as this can't-miss running back prospect, a guy who was going to be the defining player of his generation. Jets ended up winning enough games to drop to the 4th overall pick that year. They lost out on Reggie Bush. They ended up drafting DeBrickashaw Ferguson, which ended up working out much better for them. Now, Reggie Bush was actually a decent player. Not that Reggie Bush was a complete bust, but Reggie Bush was just a quality back with good receiving skills. He wasn't anything special. He was a guy who had a 1,000-yard season or two. He was a productive player, but he was not a guy who ever justified the 2nd overall pick. Well, whereas DeBrickashaw Ferguson locked down the left tackle position for the Jets for a decade and literally only missed one snap. And he missed that one snap because it was a trick play. The absolute model of durability for this team. So I think, you can make an argument either way. I think it depends on the year. There are some years where you really miss out on a great player, and some years where you get DeBrickashaw Ferguson instead of Reggie Bush, and it all works out for you. Intellectually, I understand there's kind of a couple other components that this is not a Jets team that's going to be building to anything in the future. Sometimes you have a young team and you win late season games. You kind of build momentum. Think about Detroit 2 years ago. The Lions got off to a horrible start in 2022. They got on a roll near the end of the season. They finished 9-7. They barely missed out on the playoffs, and that carried over into 2023 when they won the division, and 2024 where they're maybe the best team in the NFL. That's not going to be the case for these Jets. These Jets, we know that there's going to be an overhaul in a lot of key spots, including the quarterback position. So, I guess that's a point in favor of the tank. Another point that might be in favor of the tank is I can't imagine, I should never say I can't imagine the Jets being this dumb, but it's tough for me to believe that Aaron Rodgers could return to this team next year under any circumstances. But the circumstance where Aaron Rodgers could conceivably return would be the team getting on a late season roll and the Jets deluding themselves into thinking Rodgers has figured it out and that he can come back and be a productive quarterback next year. So I guess if you're trying to avoid that, maybe that's another argument in favor of the Jets losing, the Jets tanking. But one thing we know is that the Jets players are not going to try and lose this game. It depends. The effort level of this team has varied week to week. But I think in general, you're not going to see guys go out there and lose games on purpose. Now, you may get to a point where the Jets fall behind early, where maybe guys check out a little bit, maybe guys make business decisions, maybe guys try and avoid getting hurt near the end of the season. That's something that does happen on the NFL field in these December games for teams that are hopelessly out of the playoff race. But you're not going to see guys go out there and intentionally try to lose because it doesn't make any sense for them to do that. The film in this is your video, is your resume. Other teams are watching how you're performing in these games. So if you go out there and try and lose, well, teams are going to see that. You don't want to do that. Again, that's different from, you fall behind 3 touchdowns early. Maybe, guys aren't rallying to the tackle. Maybe guys don't want to take a big hit. That's a little bit different. But nobody out there is trying to lose these games. You think Jeff Ulbrich wants to lose these games? Jeff Ulbrich has taken enough of a hit to his reputation this year. He doesn't need to go out there and have a team play lackadaisical football. He doesn't need to have a team go out there and lose games on purpose. And the other aspect of this, of course, is, if you're a player, the guy the team drafts might be your replacement. If the team tanks, if the team loses games and gets a higher draft pick, the high draft pick might be the guy who replaces you. You certainly don't want that to happen. You want to play hard. So the Jets are not going to go out there and lose these games on purpose. The question is, is it better for the team to win or lose? And at the end of the day, I think you can make a credible argument for either side. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to approach a season like this as a fan. I think we all have to do whatever we can to get through it. I really don't like the divisiveness in the fan base where, people are saying, oh, you're a bad fan, or, that doesn't help anybody. I think, everybody's got to find their own path. Everybody has to do whatever is right for them. If that's finding enjoyment in a lost Jet season and a couple of good plays, then that's great. If it's the Jets losing and you're thinking longer term and you think that they're better off getting a high draft pick, that's also great. Whatever you choose, that's your decision. One thing I think we can all agree on is that we want to see some of the younger players play well. I think we want to see Olu Fashanu play well, and even if you're rooting for a loss, you want to see Olu Fashanu play well on a loss. You want to see some of the younger players shine for the future. But beyond that, I'm not sure how much of a difference this game really makes in the long run for the Jets, win or lose. I think part of it's we try and assign meaning to everything. I think in a lost season, you try and find a greater meaning for for your team. You want losing to serve a greater purpose. I'm just not sure it does at this point. I think this is just a total lost season, and whether the Jets pick 6th or 4th or 8th, I'm not sure how much of a difference it's going to make to this team in the long run. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about this matchup, and I think there's one key for the Jets on the defensive side of the ball facing this Jacksonville offense. It's a key that could decide the game. We'll talk about what that is as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Make your holidays bigger and brighter with Prize Picks, the best place to get real money action while watching your favorite sports. Join now because this holiday season, Prize Picks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Pickmas. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. Plus, score an extra $30 off with promo code NFL. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code NFL. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code NFL. Minimum purchase may apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. The Jets are in Jacksonville this weekend. 1 o'clock kickoff time on Sunday. The game will be shown on Fox. A couple of 3-10 teams. A couple of teams playing out the string, looking to get a win in a loss season. And a couple of teams, frankly, that if they lose, they improve their draft positioning because the Jets and Jaguars are both 3-10. You have 8 teams in the league right now that are either 2-11 or 3-10. So a lot of congestion at the top of the NFL draft order. The loser will get a leg up, a better draft position. The winner will get a win in a loss season. So I guess everybody gets something this Sunday. Maybe it's just because it's the holiday season. I'm in a generous mood trying to find the glasses half full for both teams in this game. Now, Jacksonville will be starting their backup quarterback, and it's a name familiar to Jets fans. It's Mac Jones, who was a former first-round pick of the New England Patriots back in 2021. And back in 2021, I think Jets fans and Patriots fans dreamed of a decade-plus rivalry between Zach Wilson and Mac Jones. The Jets drafted Zach Wilson second overall back in 2021. There were obviously hopes that he'd be a great quarterback for the Jets. Patriots fans had the same hopes for Mac Jones, and really did not work out for either guy. Mac Jones had a decent rookie season with New England, but kind of things really regressed in year 2 and beyond, and ended up getting traded to Jacksonville over the offseason, just as the Jets traded Zach Wilson to Denver over the offseason. Mac Jones will now be the Jaguars starting quarterback the rest of the season. If he missed it a couple weeks ago, Trevor Lawrence took a brutal hit, a play that got a player suspended. So now the Jets face Mac Jones, a guy they should be pretty familiar with from his time in New England. And I think the key for the Jets defense is just limit the big play. You want to force Mac Jones to put together 8, 9, 10 play drives against you because he's a very limited quarterback. He's a quarterback who's shown some ability to play in the league. That rookie season, he was actually pretty solid, but a quarterback who's played with nowhere near the level of consistency that the Patriots hoped he would play with when they drafted him. And he's a guy who hasn't really shown himself to be capable of putting together those long drives. Now, a lot of people are critical of Mac Jones because, he doesn't have a big arm, which is true. He doesn't have the biggest arm in the league. I do think sometimes arm strength is a little overrated. It's a question of whether you can get the ball where it needs to go on time. Mac Jones is capable of hitting a deep pass. I think if a quarterback doesn't have a big arm, people think, well, he can't throw the deep ball. Mac Jones has the ability to throw the ball deep. And the Jaguars have a very dynamic rookie receiver, Brian Thomas Jr., who was a guy they drafted in the first round in the NFL draft back in the spring. I think he ranks 10th in yardage on deep passes this season. So he's a guy who can get open deep, guy with a lot of speed. The Jaguars drafted him out of LSU. You want to keep him under control. Now, it seems like Sauce Gardner may be trending towards being able to play in this game. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. We'll know more when this injury report comes out on Friday. But I think shutting down Thomas is pretty much the key against Jacksonville. If there was one key, it's don't allow Thomas to get deep. And I also think in a game like this, we talked a little bit earlier about the emotional toll a game can take like this. You take a couple shots early, especially in the first quarter. You get beat for deep ball. You get the sense maybe this is not your day. Maybe that causes some emotional turmoil on the sideline. Maybe that you get a sense of dread on the sideline. Maybe that impacts the way the guys play. Again, you want to force the Jaguars to put together long drives because with their backup quarterback, that's something they're probably not going to be able to do consistently. Against Miami, the Jets defense actually had a couple moments, especially early in the second half. But even in the first half, the one thing I thought they did pretty well, with one exception, was they kept Miami out of the end zone. They did a good job. Did a good job up until the fourth quarter of bending but not breaking. Even when the Jets defense gave up yardage, they usually were able to make the play that they needed to in the red zone, or before the Dolphins got the ball into the end zone. And I think, again, that's going to be a key to victory for the Jets. Another guy I have my eye on in this game, Travis Etienne, who, of course, Jacksonville's running back, who's having kind of a down season. He's not the player he's been in the past. But, in a one-game situation, he can be a threat. On any given play, he can be a threat. That the talent is lurking inside of him. And we know that this Jets defense, it's been very up and down when we talk about how well they've tackled. So this is going to have to be a week where, the Jets have had some weeks where it's been a tackling disaster. The Arizona game, there have been the San Francisco game week 1. We could go down the list of games where the Jets haven't been able to tackle well. And part of the concept of bending but not breaking is you have to be able to tackle effectively. So I know it's kind of a cliche. I know what I just gave you could be seen on like any studio show when they give you the most basic keys to victory. But I think for the Jets in this game, it's paramount to avoid letting Jacksonville get the splash plays, because if they do that, you're up against a backup quarterback. You're up against a guy who really, hasn't played with any level of consistency since he entered the NFL. And a guy who doesn't have a ton of mobility. If Quinnen Williams and Will McDonald can get into the backfield against Mac Jones, the odds are high they're going to be able to register a sack, because Jones just doesn't really have much ability to extend plays. He doesn't have the ability to really hurt you on the ground the way other quarterbacks the Jets have played this year have. I mean, for the Jets this year, one of the issues, it hasn't been as bad in recent weeks, but the Jets through points this season have been beaten by quarterback scrambles a lot, where guys have not been disciplined in their rush lanes. And really, it's not, whenever a quarterback scrambles, people ask where the spy was. Well, you don't need to spy a quarterback to be able to contain them to contain their scrambling. You need guys who are disciplined in the rush lanes, guys who aren't flying up the field, guys who aren't running, from the edge, who aren't running 30 yards past the quarterback, or maybe not 30, guys who aren't running 3 yards past the quarterback. You need guys to play with discipline. That's something that's been lacking for the Jets this season. The good news is that Mac Jones is not super mobile, so he's not going to be a guy who can break off a 20, 30-yard run. You do still have to be disciplined. He does have legs, so on a 3rd and 4, you got to make sure guys aren't flying up the field. You can probably scramble for 5 yards to pick up a critical 3rd down, but he's not a guy who has the physical tools to threaten a defense the way even like a Trevor Lawrence would. And that's why he's a backup quarterback. But this is still a quarterback capable of beating the Jets. We've seen him beat the Jets before. So he's still, even though he hasn't been great, even though he's been inconsistent through his career, if the Jets defense doesn't execute, if the Jets defense, makes things easy on him, if they blow coverages, which they've been doing all season long, if they don't communicate on the back end, which was a big issue against the Miami Dolphins. I mean, I wrote a couple articles this week on GangGreenNation.com about that, how they, how many times there were miscommunications on the touchdown that tied the game with the 2-point conversion in the fourth quarter. DJ Reed just doesn't fight hard enough to get over a natural rub that was created pre-snap by motion. The game-winning touchdown by Jonnu Smith, where Jamie Sherwood and Jalen Mills kind of miscommunicated, and I thought it was more on Mills than Sherwood. If you don't communicate, you allow guys to run free, Jones can hit them. Just because Jones doesn't have the biggest arm in the world doesn't mean he's incapable of making plays down the field. If you bust coverages, he'll find the guy. He's just not a guy who can really create a lot on his own. And that should be to the Jets' advantage. And when I say he can't create a lot on his own, he's not a guy who's going to be able to fit a lot of balls into tight windows. He's not going to be able to make the really tough throws on the out route, on the 15-yard out routes and into traffic. He's not going to be able to do much with his legs. So all these things should be advantages for the Jets, but they have to keep Brian Thomas under control. They have to keep Travis Etienne under control. They have to keep the other Jacksonville guys under control. You don't want to have some random guy throw up a big game against you. And they need to tackle effectively. If they do these things, they can keep themselves right in this game. And I guess, it's tough to be sitting here in December with the expectations we have this season and talk about how the goal is for the Jets to be keeping themselves in a game against a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars. But it's where we are right now. And Jacksonville, not a dynamic offense. Jets defense has been very up and down this season. If Jets defense shows up in this game, they could do pretty well against the Jaguars defense, I think. Now, here on the Lockdown Jets podcast, we'll talk about the Jets offense. Will we see a repeat of the dynamic unit we saw against Miami? Or will it be a replay of what we saw the first 12 games? I think it all depends on one player. You probably know who that player is. We'll talk about it as we continue here on this Friday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Jets 3.5-point road favorites against the Jaguars. I know yesterday we did our crossover show with my friend Tony Wiggins, and Tony said he thinks the Jets are going to win. I don't know. Jets 3.5-point road favorites against anybody. I know Jacksonville's not good. Well, if you think that's a good line, well, visit FanDuel.com. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Friday. The Jets and Jaguars play Sunday, 1 o'clock Eastern time. The game will be shown on Fox. So let's just make a note of that. This is not a CBS game on Sunday, although I think you can probably figure it out. If you turn on CBS at 1 o'clock and see the Jets aren't there, you'll probably turn to Fox. But just make a note, this game is on Fox. Jets playing out the string, 4 games left in a lost season. One of the most miserable Jets seasons a lot of us have had in our lifetimes, which is really saying something. And, of course, the source of so much hope before the season was Aaron Rodgers, who has simply not played at a very high level for the Jets this season. Against Miami, you saw a guy who was a different quarterback from the quarterback we've seen much of the season. You saw a Rodgers who was willing to stand in the pocket, a Rodgers who was willing to trust his protection, a Rodgers who was willing to deliver the ball down the field. And what came from it was the first 300-yard game of the season for Aaron Rodgers, and not just that, the first 300 game he's had in just about 3 calendar seasons, or 3 calendar years. So the question is, which Aaron Rodgers will we see in this game? Will we see the Rodgers of the Miami game? Was that a sign that maybe he's getting more comfortable? Maybe the Achilles has gotten to a point where he's feeling a little bit better. He's feeling, a little bit more confident standing in the pocket. Maybe he's starting to trust his offensive line a little bit after, 3.5 months. Maybe he's starting to feel comfortable with the guys blocking for him. The Jets could certainly hope that's the case. Part of that might be a question of whether Morgan Moses plays in this game. Again, we'll have more information on that today once Jeff Albrook's injury report came out. But one thing I did notice is that when Moses left in the fourth quarter of that game and Max Mitchell came in, first of all, I don't think the offensive line played quite as well. But second of all, it seemed like Rodgers became a little less comfortable with his protection at that point. As I've said this many times on the show, I think the great players, even the guys who don't really have much left in the tank, there's always a great performance or two lurking inside of them. Their best game is still as good as it's ever been. It just doesn't come as consistently. And for what we saw from Rodgers last weekend, we saw a guy who still does have a good game in him. I don't know, based on what we saw the first 3.5 months of the season, that's something we're going to see all that often. But it could appear in this game against Jacksonville because this is not a great Jaguars defense. They have a couple of decent edge rushers, Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker, who of course was the #1 overall pick a couple of years ago. But it's not a unit that's really loaded with talent. I think their defensive tackle play is very shaky. In fact, I think this Jets interior offensive line, John Simpson, Joe Tippmann, Elijah Vera Tucker, they should have a lot of success against these guys. Rodgers should have a pretty clean middle of his pocket, which means even if the Jets have issues off the edge, even if the tackles, Olufoshinu at left tackle, probably Morgan Moses at right tackle. You hope Morgan Moses at right tackle. Even if they have issues, Rodgers should still have a pretty clear lane to step up in. Last week, I think it was also true against Seattle. Rodgers isn't as fast as he was in the Green Bay days. You just see he doesn't have anywhere near the mobility he used to have against the Packers. But the bye week may have done him some good because we saw Rodgers who was at least a little bit more comfortable moving within the pocket, a guy who could step up into a soft spot of the defense. The other thing we saw was Well, he's still not great at evading defenders. Now, in a short area, he actually can step he can make a move or two and throw a defender off. He's not good at like the sprint away from the defender left or right. But if he sees something down the field, he was a little bit more willing to like drift right or drift left to make his throwing angle easier. And that's something that was new after the bye. That's something we hadn't seen much early in the season. But after the bye, it seemed like Rodgers was more willing to, even if he wasn't under pressure, if moving left or moving right gave him an easier angle to throw the ball, he was more willing to do that. So the question is, how dynamic is Rodgers going to be in this game? He has not been a very dynamic quarterback through much of the season. He's been a very disappointing quarterback through much of the season. The guy we saw last week, I think, was the quarterback most of us hoped we'd have as when the season began. A guy who, no matter is not really the same guy in Green Bay who won the 4 MVPs, but a guy who can make plays, a guy who can lift the team occasionally, a guy who can lead a functional offense. And with a better defensive performance last week, the Jets probably would have won the game. With better clock management last week, the Jets would have won the game. With better special teams last week, the Jets would have won the game. But the overall offensive performance was one of the better offensive performances the Jets have had all season long. And a lot of that goes back to Rodgers looking so different. Rodgers looking like a guy who, even if he, has lost a lot of mobility, can move a little bit. Guy who's willing to stand in the pocket. Guy who's willing to take a hit. Guy who's willing to throw the ball down the field. If that guy shows up, the Jets will have a very good chance of winning this game. If it's the Rodgers we saw through the first 12 weeks of the season, this is going to be a very tight game, and the Jets certainly could lose it. So the big question's there. Another question I think that will be answered in this game will be about the Jets' run game. Doesn't sound like Breece Hall is going to be in this one. So how much can the Jets get from Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis? Both of them flashed a little bit. Allen was coming out of a really long slump. I mean, Allen has really struggled since the calendar turned from September to October. After a very, very promising September, the Jets did not get a lot from Allen in the months of October or November. As last week was a decent performance. It wasn't spectacular. It was a decent performance from Allen. And Isaiah Davis is flashing a little bit. These guys can help Rodgers out. And the Jets can also lean on the run game to a degree. I think a productive run game obviously keeps you out of the bad downs and distances. It keeps the defense honest. It prevents the pass rush from flying up the field. But I do think that this game's ultimately going to come down to Rodgers and which version of Rodgers we see. And if the Jets get the good version of Rodgers, if the Jets get the Miami version of Rodgers, feeling good because the weather's warm, feeling good because the Jaguars don't have a great interior pass rush, feeling good because maybe he's physically in a better place than he was earlier in the season, then I think good things can happen for the Jets in this game, and the fans rooting for wins will be happy. Maybe the fans rooting for the tank will be unhappy, but Jets will have Jets will be in a decent spot in this game, I think. But we'll have to see what happens. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and listening on a podcast, first give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. We'll be back after the game to talk more Jets.